why Bitcoin miners are so key for the AI super cycle, which is what you also mentioned in your press release, are the main difference between a tier 1 Bitcoin mining site and a tier 3 AI data center, like the one that you are building?
Yeah, that's a great question, Stefania. So it's a really interesting analogy because in a Bitcoin mining data center, you have your halls where you have thousands, or in our case, tens of thousands of ASIC miners. And you want as much electricity getting to the ASIC miners as possible. So in the data center industry, they have this concept of the PUE, power usage effectiveness ratio. So if you have a PUE of 1, that means 100% of the power is going to your compute. If you have a PUE of 1.3, that 0.3, it means 30% of the power is going to ancillary load. It can be cooling, it can be anything else that's not related to compute. Now, why would you have a PUE of 1.3 instead of 1? Well, you need air conditioning, which is, effectively climate control, any power that's assigned to backup generators, etc.
Hi and welcome back to the Financial Fox. My name is Steffi and today I'm speaking with Aydin Kilic, CEO and President of Hive Digital Technologies, a NASDAQ listed Bitcoin miner and AI data center operator, and one of the most interesting companies at the intersection of energy, compute, Bitcoin mining and digital infrastructure, and obviously a long-standing partner of the Financial Fox channel. 2025 has been a great year for Hive. They just hit 23 exahash last week, and really they are among the top performance this year with over 280% year-to-date growth. They've also just secured a new land in Canada to upgrade their operations from a tier 1 mining site to a tier 3 plus AI data center, powered entirely by green energy. So for this episode, I really want you to focus specifically on that transition from tier 1 Bitcoin mining site to tier 3 data center, focus on obviously AI compute. In the last 2 years, it's been all about Bitcoin miners pivoting to AI. Actually, Hive was the first one to do that. Now, how does Bitcoin mining infrastructure evolve into AI infrastructure? So how do you go from rows of ASICs to high-density GPU clusters? And why does Hive claim they can do that in months while most hyperscalers take years? And the very important question is, why does Hive claim they can do that in months while most hyperscalers take years to build tier 3 data centers? So I think that's a really important question, and that's what we are gonna unpack today. The real technical story behind the upgrade from mining infrastructure to AI infrastructure was faster and why investors should care. Before we get into the interview, just a couple of things. If you are watching on YouTube, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, and if it's on X, please follow us there. Remember that your support is crucial to grow the channel so we can educate more people about emerging technology, Bitcoin and crypto. And also remember that all the content on the show is for informational purposes only and not intended as financial advice. Any opinions expressed by me or my guests are ours alone, and you should not act solely on the back of them. As always, do your own research, level up your skills, and be accountable for your own decisions. With that being said, let's get Aydin on the show. Yeah, Aydin, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm great. It's good to see you. We had a great week in Lugano for Plan B. I'm back in Vancouver now before I fly off to Miami for the Cantor conference next week. And then I'll go to Paraguay to oversee the completion of our phase 3 in Venezuela.
Wow, very interesting. Super busy. Listen, Aydin, it's great to have you back on the show. I really wanted you to come on because there are quite a few things that I want to explain, obviously, for a wider audience, for investors that are following Hive, and for many others. They also need to be educated about why Bitcoin miners are so key
for the AI super cycle, which is what you also mentioned in your press release. So let's start with a question that I think is very interesting. Are the main difference between a tier 1 Bitcoin mining site and a tier 3 AI data center, like the one that you are building?
Yeah, that's a great question, Stefania. So it's a really interesting analogy because in a Bitcoin mining data center, you have your halls where you have thousands, or in our case, tens of thousands of ASIC miners, and you want as much electricity getting to the ASIC miners as possible. So in the data center industry, they have this concept of the PUE, power usage effectiveness ratio. So if you have a PUE of 1, that means 100% of the power is going to your compute. If you have a PUE of 1.3, that 0.3, it means 30% of the power is going to ancillary load. It can be cooling, it can be anything else that's not related to compute. Now, why would you have a PUE of 1.3 instead of 1? Well, you need air conditioning, which is, effectively climate control, any power that's assigned to backup generators, etc. And so the trade-off, of course, if you have a PUE of 1.3, even 1.5, it allows you to have a very curated, climate-controlled, N+1 redundancy type of setup. Whereas in a Bitcoin mine, you don't have any redundancy. You don't have any air conditioning. You use the fans of the air of the miners themselves to draw in cool air, assuming you're doing air cooled, which is just a classic example and easy to understand. And so, for example, a lot of our data centers are passively cooled. They have these superstructures that are exoskeletons with filter walls built in, and the filter walls get exchanged from time to time. And so all the cool air is drawn in, passes through the miner, hot air is ventilated out the top. And so you get really close to a PUE of 1. You might have some lighting or, just other equipment. And of course, in a AI data center, Frank always likes to say a Bitcoin mine is like Ford F-150, and a tier 3 data center is like a Porsche, or for high performance, highly calibrated. And so I joke, you could eat off the floor in a tier 3 AI data center. You could, I mean, our data centers are pretty nice for Bitcoin mining, but people got construction boots, etc. So you might not want to eat off the floor of a Bitcoin miner. Be a little bit more dusty, that's all. If you don't mind some dust in your food, I'm sure it's fine. And moreover, I think what's interesting though is, how do you build that redundancy? And how do you create that climate controlled environment? Well, for example, in HPC data centers, you have new technology where you have DLC, direct liquid cooled on chip cooling, or you can still have an air cooled environment, but you might have a door that's liquid cooled on the back of the rack. And of course, traditional air conditioning if you're running air cooled servers. So there's all this emerging technology. Directionally though, everything's going liquid cooling for all the new NVIDIA compute. The Blackwell B300 is liquid cooled. They had an air cooled B200, I think, but really it's directionally going to liquid cool, especially the GB series, the Grace Blackwell. And of course, Vera Rubin will be in 2020, late 2026, 2027, will all be liquid cooled, because the density of power per chip is just growing. I think B300 is 1400 watts per chip, and the Rubin will be something like 2300 watts per chip. Just crazy numbers. So whereas like an H200 was like 1000 watts per chip, right? So you're getting like exponential growth in the on-chip power demand of the GPUs. So more power density in the rack, right? You're going from 130 kilowatts per rack if you want to fit 8 servers, for example, and the networking equipment. So that's why you need all this liquid cooling. Now, that's on the HPC data center side. Coming back on the Bitcoin mining side, we typically have a control ring that has servers that are responsible for all that compute, all that hash rate being funneled to the Bitcoin mining network. That is actually critical load in Bitcoin mining. So what people don't often reflect on, although what exists, at least in proper Bitcoin mines, such like every single one of Hive's facilities, our control rooms where the servers are climate controlled. They do have UPSs and they do have redundancy. So it's almost like you have a little pocket of a tier 3 data center in a section of your Bitcoin mine where your network servers are that are responsible. Because think about it, you can have tens of thousands of servers. Our one site in Iwazu is almost 12 exahash, right? The whole site. But all that data, all that hash rate needs to go, it's over 1% of the Bitcoin network. All that needs to go up to the Bitcoin network, right? Or the pool, really. And so you have to have that connection can never, ever, ever go down, because you can have all your servers hashing. And if the hash rate doesn't get to the pool, you're not getting any reward for it. So you have that, like in New Brunswick, for example, we have UPSs in our control room, right? So there's actually a little bit like there's like a fingerprint or a DNA of a tier 3 data center in a proper Bitcoin mine, at least in the central control room. Now, when you go to tier 3, you need to have that climate control, that cooling, that redundancy, that uptime to make sure it never ever goes down, but for all your compute, not just the central command, right? Right? Does that make sense?
That makes sense, but I just have another question regarding kind of really the machine and more maybe the technical pieces of this data center. Understanding is about making sure that you manage, the cooling but when it comes down to the machine, do you need a specific upgrade from the Bitcoin mining to the
Oh yeah, I mean, so if we talk, so I was talking about sort of the DNA of each type of facilities. So no redundancy in a Bitcoin mine, PUE close to 1. Tier 3 data center, whether it's air or liquid cooled, you might have a PUE of 1.3, 1.5, 99.998% uptime, controlled environment, and it's redundancy, it's uptime, it's cooled, climate controlled. Those are the differences. And then the similarity was just that we have a little bit of that. We have a fingerprint of that in our Bitcoin mine in the central control room. We're in a central control room for the Bitcoin mine or the servers that route all the hash rate to the network. So that connection can never ever go down. Just speaking from experience, for example, in New Brunswick, we have UPSs, which are an integral component in tier 3 data centers, but we already have that in the control room at New Brunswick, for example, and we already have some air conditioning. So so I talked about the differences and now the similarities. So when you go to a tier 3 data center, you need to have, your chillers outdoor, you need to have your generators, which are your backup power. Of course, you need to have your cooling system, whether it's going to be air cooled. Of course, directionally now everything's liquid cooled. So, you have the cooler doors on the racks, so on and so forth, right? So all of that extra stuff are things that you're bringing to site. Now, it's not like you're just going in the exact same data hall and just converting it. You might actually just do a standalone new facility, because what you have at the Bitcoin mine is you have the high voltage. We have an 80 megawatt substation in New Brunswick, right? It's a 132 kilovolt line coming to the site on our own dedicated transmission line. We have a 50 megawatt and a 30 megawatt substation. And then that takes the power down, the 32 kilovolts, and then that gets distributed to our medium voltage transformers, right? And so the medium voltage transformers then distribute the power, whatever the case is, 415, 240 volt, right? Which is something that the Bitcoin mining servers can use. Now, the medium voltage transformers, again, because you need that redundancy, you might have a different configuration for tier 3, but the high voltage and a lot of the electrical infrastructure is already in place at a Bitcoin mine, of course, the LAN. And so depending on what you want to do, maybe you just implement a modular solution on the site, right? But you have some of the long lead time items in place. But there are other long lead time items such as generators, chillers, UPS batteries. And so those are the things that you would need to order. But what it all adds up to is you're able to turn around a site in less than a year, potentially, right? So if you go order, like if we want to kick off the conversion of our site in Sweden, Little Boden, we also press released that recently, right? Our target's to have that online for Q4 of next year. So it's basically a year from now, And so we just need to do long lead time order some long lead time items, and then, the on-site work can happen, but it's really just getting ahead of those long lead time items to get.
And tell me how long would it take to kind of build the tier 3 data center from scratch if you didn't have the Bitcoin mining infrastructure?
Well, if you're building it from scratch, you typically are going through like a pretty extensive permitting process, right? Because you're going to be looking at, zoning, compliance, getting through building permit, etc., and all the electrical permitting, because you're going to be building a substation. You're going to be, installing all of this hardware and all this infrastructure on site. Whereas when you're doing a conversion to tier 3, in some cases, like for example, in our Little Boden site, we can actually reuse a lot. That was actually built as a GPU data center. So we can reuse the buildings and the structures And we have a site plan already, okay, where the chiller's going to go, where the generator's going to go, what rooms are the racks going to go. So we had that configuration all mapped out already, right? And then in New Brunswick, because it's a passively cooled ASIC site, but we bought 32 acres of land next door, right? So we're able to, instead of just retrofit a building that was passively cooled, it's like an exoskeleton, it's really meant for ASICs. Instead of retrofitting all of that, we have 32 acres of land to do build to suit, but there's a lot of good modular solutions, right? So with New Brunswick, we can either do hyperscaler colo, right, and build to suit for that, or if we want to do our own AI cloud, because, you know, 1,000 B200s, for example, is about 1.8 megawatts, right? Just round it up, say 2 megawatts for a 1K cluster, 1,024 GPUs. So renting 1,000, if you want to bring online 1,000 or 2,000 or 8,000 GPUs, you would do, 2 megawatts, 4 megawatts, for 8,000 GPUs, it'd be 16 megawatts, for example. We don't need to do the whole 80 megawatts all at once, right? And then the other thing to keep in mind is with the PUE and usable power, New Brunswick would offer about 50 to 55 megawatts of IT load. And so that's the total number that you would use to calculate, okay, how many B200s could I operate? And so that site would be able to do over 25,000 B200, which would be really exciting. And so that's a massive amount of GPUs to run your own cloud. Right now, we're running 5,000 NVIDIA GPUs. Of course, we have the A40s, H100s, and H200s. That's doing our 20 million ARR as we've hit that milestone in May of this year. The expansion thereon is to bring on 2,000 Blackwell GPUs in Little Bowden, 2,000 in our Toronto data center, and then 2,000 through our partnership with Dell. So that's an additional 6,000 GPUs. But that doesn't even include New Brunswick yet. So if we brought on New Brunswick and converted that, that's a long tail of another 25,200s based on reference architecture specs. So that's a lot of GPUs. But because we run our own cloud and we rent our GPUs, it's very different. And it's important, I think, for investors to understand when you're doing hyperscaler colo, what are you doing? Okay, so you're renting your rack space, right, for maybe $140 a kilowatt a month. I think Cypher just did their deal for close to $100 a kilowatt a month. It was a big deal with AWS for a long lease time. I think they did it at a very low rate just to lock in that huge contract with a bit of a discount. So your margins aren't really as good because what does I'll give you an example, $150 a kilowatt a month. What does that mean? Well, in Bitcoin mining, or when you look at your billing for your electrical bill or your data center, you divide by 730 hours in a month. So what is $150 a kilowatt divided by 730 hours a month? It works out to about 20 cents a kilowatt hour, right? Simply, and rough numbers. And you say, okay, well, how much margin am I making if I'm renting my rack space for 20 cents a kilowatt hours? Your power costs 5 cents, and then you've got to build in redundancy, and you're going to have staff, etc. And then when you look at running your own cloud, well, now your own cloud, you're renting, GPUs for $2, maybe $3 an hour. And again, you just divide the GPU hourly rate by the power consumption of the GPU to get a $1 per kilowatt hour figure, right? So for example, for 800s, if they're being rented on demand, really simple numbers, for $3 an hour, and roughly, one GPU is about a kilowatt. It's about $3 a kilowatt hour when you're of revenue that you're generating when you're doing your own cloud. Now, of course, you've got that additional CapEx when you're doing your own cloud because you're buying the GPU. So the model that Hive has, we're vertically integrated. We build and operate our data centers as well as running our own cloud, much like Iron. Iron is known for buying a lot of GPUs because they're renting them out and doing their own cloud. Now the CapEx is roughly 30 million a megawatt for the GPUs. And, your build costs, like in Sweden, where it's very attractive, is something like 6 million a megawatt to do the conversion, because that is a GPU data center already. It's much more competitive. I think, typically if you ask an analyst, they might say it's $8 to $10 million a megawatt US to build tier 3. So you do have some economies, not quite economies of scale, but economies of efficiency when you have a lot of the parts in place when you're doing a conversion of Bitcoin mine to an HPC tier 3. But then of course, if you're going to go the cloud route and buy the GPUs, it's another 30 million a megawatt. So typically you're trying to target a 2.5 year ROI after operating cost for your GPU cloud. And then if you're just doing hyperscaler colo, it can be like, say you're spending 8 million a megawatt. And if you're renting it for 20 cents a kilowatt hour, you can do all the arithmetic, something like an 8-year ROI, 7-8-year ROI. So it's a lower margin, but people are out here signing 10, 12-year contracts, what have you, right? So interestingly enough, when you're doing hyperscaler colo, you are not doing AI yourself. You're not operating LLMs. You're just providing, the white space, something that's rack ready for another, maybe a hyperscaler to come in. They're installing all their GPUs. They're the ones operating the nodes, and they're the ones that are selling either GPUs per hour or tokens. But again, at Hive, we're vertically integrated because we have our own platform. We work directly with researchers who are renting our GPUs by the hour. And the next step is actually having software platform where people can run models and rent tokens, because the unit of compute really, and Jensen talked a lot about this at his GTC keynote in March, it's all about tokens, right? And building AI factories. So if you're truly vertically integrated, you can even have a user interface, user experience where people can actually consume tokens, which is much higher margin than just renting the whole GPU cluster by the hour.
Super insightful. So give us just a quick outlook. Remind also us how many data center you have got now, and which are only Bitcoin mining, which are already AI GPU data centers, and is the plan really to go just towards the tier 3 data center? Is that what you are planning to do?
Well, for some, like for New Brunswick, we've announced that direction, and a big catalyst for that was getting the 32 acres of land, which gives us that footprint to build the tier 3. Now you look at Paraguay, and we have 300 megawatts. We're at 23 exahash globally now. We'll be at 25 exahash in a week or two. We'll be well ahead of our Thanksgiving target to hit 25 exahash, which is phenomenal. And I'm super pleased with the team's execution. Everyone's been working around the clock. But Paraguay is a phenomenal jurisdiction for Bitcoin mining. We have large amounts of hydroelectric power, and we announced another 100 megawatts. It's actually an expansion of our Iguazu facility. And what's really nice is the civil infrastructure in Iguazu was already done for 300 megawatts. We literally just need to drop in another substation. The pads and everything's there. It was always meant to be a 300 megawatt site long term. And so the cost to bring that online is only going to be $200-300 grand a megawatt, which is very, very cheap and attractive. And that allows us to hit a next year target of 35 exahash, right? So I was asked last week on an interview, exactly, are you only going to do HPC or only going to do Bitcoin? We do what is the best business. If it's a good deal, we're going to do it. If it's accretive to our shareholders, we're going to do it. If we can buy something below cost, or we can buy something that's already complete at cost, we will do that. We did with the Iguazu site. And now our cost to complete that, because we have all the bones to get that to 300 megawatts. And by the way, to be clear, we also have 100 megawatts in Valenzuela. So what I mean is collectively in Paraguay today, or in 2 weeks, we'll be fully 300 hashing, 300 megawatts. And now a fourth phase, 400 megawatts, which happens to deal with Iguazu, will bring us to 400 megawatts in Paraguay and 35 exahash target for the end of next year. But it's very accretive, very ROI focused. And so with that 70 it's actually 70 megawatts operating in New Brunswick, but 80 megawatt substation usable. That can be repurposed to HPC because it's close to the border of Maine. It fits in the Buzz Sovereign strategy. And then moreover, we have the Toronto data center, which again, Toronto, Canada's largest metropolitan area, on par with Chicago in terms of population. It's the home of the Vector Institute, where Geoffrey Hinton, the godfather of AI, is based out of. And so Toronto is a very exciting market to be bringing online. And Blackwell's, they might be B300s by the time that site is complete in Q4 of next year. And then, of course, there's Little Boating in northern Sweden, and then the partnership with Bell, which is in Manitoba, the first data center. So it's different data centers. Then we have our legacy facility in Quebec, in Lachute, is 30 megawatts of Bitcoin mining. And again, where we own the land is where we consider, and based on, a stability of the power grid, fiber connectivity to the site. That is another. Oh yeah, and at the top of the interview, we're talking about the conversion of a Bitcoin mines to HPC. Of course, you need the fiber and connectivity, and you have to analyze the region for each site to make sure that it's a candidate. If the connectivity doesn't exist, can you bring it to the site Does it fit within budget? It's all just an analysis of budget and ROI at the end of the day, right? We're running a business here. We're trying to build value for shareholders.
Yeah, it's very interesting because obviously it's saving time. That's so important. And then it's the question of saving money, right? And if you're able to save a significant amount of money, then you can generate more revenue and everything becomes more profitable. Very interesting. Now, just finally, I just want to touch on the green energy because, as I understand, sustainable energy, green energy is very important when it comes down to AI. Maybe it's not so important in the Bitcoin mining space, but it should actually. So tell us maybe, you travel a lot, you talk a lot with the AI leaders, you were in NVIDIA headquarter with Frank. So how green energy is important when it comes to AI?
I think green energy, sustainable energy is desirable in any industry. Want to be mindful. Look, in certain markets, some people don't care. I don't think so much it more important for AI or more important for Bitcoin mining, but what I can tell you is that when Hive did the Buzz miner, which was our own ASIC miner, which was powered by Intel ASICs, the block scale ASICs, we were shortlisted and selected as one of the 4 proponents in that project because we used green energy. Now, we're the only one of those 4 that actually managed to build the unit successfully, built over an exahash. They're still mining to this day, might I add. And earlier on in our conversations, it was favorable with NVIDIA because when we were buying large allocations of chips, we bought $66 million of GPUs in 2021 during the ETH mining era. So NVIDIA communicated to us that they did value that. But I think right now the AI industry is certainly looking at scale, happen to seek scale along with being green energy where we can. It's just part of the Hive ethos. We're aware it's an arms race. So when you talk about saving money and saving time, I think as stewards of capital, our fiduciaries to always save money, be cost conscious, so we can deliver maximum value for shareholders. I know I sound like a CEO and I'm saying that, but I am the CEO and it's my job and it's our team's collective effort and it's a labor of love for us. We're truly passionate about it. But the other thing, more importantly, arguably, is saving time because time to market is so valuable, right? So when we get focused on a site, we move extremely quick. I think that was evident when we acquired the Bitfarm site in Iwazu. We brought that whole 200 megawatt site online in 3 months. We brought on an exahash a week, 12 weeks in a row. We got from 6 to 18 exahash in 3 months. So we move very fast. We're very focused. Frank likes to call us our Navy SEALs. And we've had Craig Tavares join. And, with Buzz, he brings a wealth of experience. He's been doing a phenomenal job bringing the Bell partnership. And so we've got a really stellar team. And I think that you've also got an interview with Craig, which is great. And so we really like Navy SEALs. Everyone's like a high RPM, high octane, high performance individual at Hive and Buzz. And that's just what it's about. So we're really excited. We think 2026 is going to be 2025 has been a banner year for, you've seen our stock re-rate. We're north of a 1.5 billion US market cap in a stock over $5 US, which are, kind of these first, 500 million, $1 billion market cap. These are hurdles you get over because then you get on the eyes of more institutions, and over $5 stock price, it allows more institutions to look at you. And so we've broken through. We're grateful to have Citadel as our largest shareholder. So it's a very exciting time. And I think as we bring online the Blackwell compute over the next year, and people see that we are an innovator, but we also execute on our promises, right? We scaled the AI cloud revenue from 1 to 10 to 20 million, just like we said we would. And our target for end of 2026 is over 100 million. So if you look, yeah, so stand by. Don't stand by, take action, and yes, I think, I just think that we have so much amazing stuff that there is a lot of upside as we continue to re-rate. And I think as more institutional and even retail shareholders throughout the US and around the world see the exciting things that we're doing. And, we got a very active Twitter feed, even on LinkedIn, and of course the press releases, right? So it's going to be a exciting quarter. It's going to be an exciting year ahead. Stay tuned.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think one point that I just want to add, because I think is very important, is about performance, is about financial discipline, but it's also about integrity. And I think that's what your team and yourself and everybody at Hive has got, and it pays off over time. Act with integrity, I think, is just really the fundamentals of any business. And unfortunately, not many are actually following it. So really kudos to all the team at Hive, because it's great to have people like you in the space. So thank you. It was a great to have you on the show, and thank you for sharing all the insights on Hive and how we can convert tier 1 data center to tier 3 data center.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Stefania. Always a pleasure.